Welcome back to the Masters of Modern. I'm your host, Alex Kess, with special guest from Hipsters of the Coast, Travis Norman. How are you today?
Alex, I'm wonderful. How are you?
Good. A little tired, and not probably as tired as you are being on the East Coast. Excited to talk Innistrad. This is definitely one of my favorite sets. I think I could like pretty comfortably say this is my favorite set and/or block of all time. It
Same.
Is in contention with Khans of Tarkir, and I don't think anything comes close to those two. And I would. Ironically, both of them famous for having like a disappointing third set. But before we jump into that, whom star you? Please let audience and the world know where you come from and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Travis Norman. I'm senior editor at Hipsters of the Coast. We're a gaming news and culture site mainly focused around Magic the Gathering, but we've also done some other things with video games and other spaces like that. And I have a column called Far Wanderings with Hipsters, and it comes out usually every other week on Wednesdays. But I think I'm going to be ramping up a little bit here and there to kind of support the new calendar and kind of content structure that we're moving forward with.
Awesome. And yeah, there will be links to all of those as long as you provide them.
Yeah, of course.
Links below in the description for sure. And let's jump into it because we can shout out things later on.
Yeah, of course.
So kind of what this conversation started in kind of two different places. One of them was back at MTG Summit, which was the event in Salt Lake City a few weeks ago. I was invited to do a Innistrad draft, triple Innistrad, original set, not block, and was reminded how amazing that format is and how amazing that set is from with draft really often teaches you from a micro level to the macro level. And then when we realized you'd be guesting on the podcast and we were looking for something to talk to, I rolled over and started creeping into your Twitter feed on recent conversations you had. And you had a conversation with Shivam about Innistrad Limited in general. And Shivam kind of made the declaratory statement that he hopes if there's ever a remastered set, that they wouldn't print spider spawning, because spider spawning, it like is the draft deck that people most often want to relive when they get their very rare chance to be able to play Innistrad. And because of that, it's kind of warped replaying the format in a way, because everyone is trying to do that deck, and so the other archetypes don't get really picked up, which from the perspective of someone who just did that draft format, absolutely is maybe true. In the sense that I definitely was like, okay, I'm just going to pick up every blue flashback card and hopefully Spider Spawning gets past me. And instead, 2 Burning Vengeance got past me, and I had my second favorite deck from that. And actually, I would argue probably my favorite deck from that format. The Spider Spawning one is cute, but yeah. And then that conversation kind of exploded, and then you and me were talking, and we're like, oh, Innistrad is dope. Let's talk about that.
Well, yeah, like speaking from experience, so I have a triple Innistrad cube, and I bring it out for usually Halloween, that kind of thing, draft with people so they can kind of experience what it's like and how great it is. And I can tell you are correct in that the first time someone drafts it, or if they're just kind of passing through, they're kind of being the tourist, just kind of taking the photos and moving on. Yes, they go for the spider spawning deck. Usually at least 1 or 2 people at the table do. And they're always encouraged by pack 1 and pack 2, because you'll get 2 out of the 3 pieces. You'll get either spider spawning, you'll get runic repetition, or memory's journey to get the infinite loop. So they'll get 2 out of the 3, and then maybe like midway through pack 3, they realize that the third isn't coming. And so they start scrambling. And so at least 1 or 2 people have these like Sultai or Simic, just good stuff piles. And you end up seeing that they tried to do the spider spawning thing and they couldn't. And then you have somebody else that is just completely demolishing the table with like Mayor of Averbrook and Dark Thicket Wolf and stuff like that. Bloodline Keeper, that kind of thing. But it follows the same script usually every time.
And it was really interesting to play. I think that like people also forget how iconic every draft archetype is in that format. I mean, like Chris Mooney, they posted like The color combo that I dislike the most, or not dislike, but they end up like not being able to figure out in limited the most, and for those Chris works at Wizards, is the Council of Colors representative of white mana. If you like what white is doing in Magic recently, they are partially responsible. But they're it's like, green white is the color that I have the most trouble figuring out what to do in limited. And what's your favorite one? And my answer was the green white humans with the flashback spell that is now on the screen that I'm forgetting the name of, but we'll look up. Hopefully, which is like. Yeah. It might be one of the first times in Magic where I like figured out a card was good in limited, because Innistrad was that early in my like draft career. I was like, oh wait, I just win if I play 2-3 human creatures and this card. And so I think like, to kind of the point on if they were to do a remaster set, I think there is a card to not include specifically from that block, but I think spider spawning, getting rid of it, I think hurts a lot of the excitement for that set. And I do think that over that set existing, people would learn to try the other things, because the other things are amazing. And it's not like, this is my one chance to ever get to play this format, I'm not going to waste it and not try and do spider spawning. It's, I get to do this a bunch. And for the people, it's don't put Invisible Stalker into a limited format.
I disagree. I think it's totally fine. Like, I think the whole concept of Invisible Stalker plus Butcher's Cleaver, which is like the busted I'm going to win this game of limited thing, I think that kind of smoothens itself out, because they are both uncommons. And so if you're lucky, you're maybe going to get, one of each or anything, if you see them together at all. Like, you might end up just getting, Invisible Stalker, just, suiting it up with something, or put travel preps on it or whatever. But it seems so rare that happens. And even if you do get both of them in your deck, it's not like there's any real good ways to kind of tutor the stuff or anything like that. So it's like, it's so infrequent, but I think it's one of these situations where the feels bads of losing to that outnumbers all of the other times that you just never see that thing happen. In a game of limited.
I think maybe there's an argument to make like Invisible Stalker rare.
That's fair.
Which maybe is the answer, now that I'm like still have it in there, but have it. I mean, it'll become like the joke rare you open when you like crack open your whole box or whatever, because like the card is worthless. But I think it's iconic enough too that like you could do a really cool art treatment to that card that people would love. Yeah. And like it's not like it's a non-playable commander card in other formats. So I do agree that like removing iconic moments from those formats is not, well, I would bet money they remove Invisible Stalker from the set. If I were to if we were like betting on this, knowing statements that designers I am friends with at Wizards have made about that format, and specifically just that card, and then knowing that they removed what's it called, Swarm from
Sprout Swarm, where they wanted to make it mythic. Like, they tried it at every rarity, even mythic, and even then it was still too good.
Yeah. And like in not defensive Invisible Stalker, but I got Invisible Stalker in my blue-red Innistrad draft, and the only equipment or way to pump it I got was the 1-mana dagger that gets +2/+0 if you're a human, and I won 3 of my 6 games that I won off of just like turn 1 knife, turn 2 Invisible Stalker, turn 3 you die in 4 turns. Good luck. And there was one that was really against Draft Nat on Twitter, where she had turn 2 the human that can, now we're just talking about Innistrad Draft, the human that can pay 1 to tap a creature down.
Oh, I think it's Abyssinian Priest, I think.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think they're definitely a priest. Yeah. Right. And then they played the 2-mana enchantment that gives +2/+2 in flying.
Oh, it's like, I think it's Spectral Journey, or not Spectral Procession.
It was standard playable. There was like a whole standard deck around the card, because it was like giving anything flying and +2/+2 decks could win with it. But it was Geist of St. Draft who you were giving it to it then, which we'll get into like how much of a banger the Innistrad is behind the draft format. But and then she got mana flooded and I got mana flooded. But because my thing was doing 4 damage a turn that she couldn't interact with, and her thing was doing only 3 damage a turn that I couldn't interact with, we were both just like, I guess you die in 6 turns, or no one did anything.
Ships passing in the night kind of thing.
Which was funny. But format's a blast. I like going back to if they were to do a remastered. I think that I would be very surprised if we don't see it soon. I think in some ways there's like a dark or in the darkest. Well, there's a lot of ways we're in the darkest timeline, but I think one of those is that Time Spell Remastered got delayed by the like year and a half that it got delayed by. I think I don't even know if it was due to COVID. I think it was due to COVID, but it was delayed by about a year. And in my head, that year delay was enough of a delay where they didn't get the response from the public for that set coming out in the way that it was positive. Like, it was well received, but they didn't get it in time. So that's why double feature exists. Like, they were planning on doing, hey, maybe remaster sets will be good. And if they're good, we can do Innistrad Remastered to time, like, within the year of the return to Innistrad with Vow and Midnight Hunt. But then they didn't get the data in time. So they were like, we don't know if this is going to be a good idea. What if it does terribly? Do we want to double down? Let's come up with another product idea that's different. And we'll do an Innistrad Remastered the next time we come to Innistrad. And so that's my tinfoil hat theory, is that we should have had it by now, but I want it so badly because the set is so good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like as we did have that period, and I don't recall the exact dates as far as like between Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow, but I remember there's a long period in which Crimson Vow was like the most common set, the most current set. And so I wonder if the community appetite is still kind of full. Like we had our fill of Innistrad for 2 sets plus double feature. And so like maybe there needs to be a bit of a break, either a year, or for what it's worth, maybe we even need to get to a point where it's September, October again, where the appetite for the kind of spooky flavor comes back. I feel like the community, we might need a little bit of time to wait. We need to see other stuff and kind of build the excitement again, because I think we almost had quote like too much of a good thing, because double feature kind of put everyone over the cliff with all the expectations that it would have been Innistrad Remastered, and then it just became more of the same. Like you're going back for seconds or thirds at a buffet place, and the chicken tenders just don't taste as good anymore. That kind of thing.
You almost want it to come up like in 2 years when we're in the middle. I do think it's the next remastered set to do. I think there's only like 3. I guess there's more than three sets I would do remasters of, but I think it is one of the ones, especially if you do not just the block of Innistrad, but you do like Innistrad holistically or Shadows plus Innistrad, which getting a format that has both Madness and Flashback in the same set sounds really, really sick. And I know there's definitely some cubes out there that do that similarly, but the only one that I can see maybe happening before is like a Ravnica version of it, just more from a like, if we don't have plans to go to Ravnica anytime soon for story reasons, but they want us to like keep Ravnica as a thing we know about, as it's Coruscant, or as it's whatever you want to say, the central world of Star Wars is. Even though we don't have a reason to go back there, here's a remastered set in 3 years because we have 10 years before going back to Ravnica or whatever. That's the only reason I can see them doing something else. But I think from a beloved perspective and looking back at like which format do people want to play the most, that like you can remaster with its other sets and make interesting. Because I think the problem with Ravnica is like you kind of have to have it be multiple packs.
Yeah.
Like you could shuffle a Fate Reforged pack and an Innistrad pack together, I feel like, and the drafting format doesn't feel that different than those packs being separate. I don't think that's true for a Ravnica set that you like original Ravnica or Return to Ravnica when you're drafting all 3 packs separately, where it had that ebb and flow.
Yeah, because initially I was thinking that perhaps there'd be a return to like a Tarkir kind of thing. And I don't know if it would be like Tarkir as like a set itself, but rather like a blend of, dragons and Khans and Fate Reforged and all that. And then perhaps that's, if we're going to speculate financially here, perhaps it's another easy way to reprint the Allied Fetch lands or something again. But yeah, I could see Tarkir coming back first, because I think there's a lot of people whose origin story starts around there. Incidentally, just a couple of years before, the Innistrad and everything with what we're talking about here. But I could definitely see both coming back in some capacity, at least in the next maybe 2 or 3 years, because I think with the return of Eldraine being so soon, we're seeing that there's more chance of a higher velocity of it just kind of boomeranging back around to another
Sure.
set. Because it took how many years from just original Theros just to get back to Theros Beyond Death, but now Eldraine is what, 3 years, 4 years maybe until the return, and that's like some of the quickest turnaround we've ever had.
Right, and I think some of that is I think some of that is one, the loss of the block system, right? With the end of cons, blocks are gone. Two, and what just means that in general, we're just going to return to sets more often because they get to do 3 sets a year. They now get to do a new plane, a return plane, and a whatever they feel like playing, if not 4 a year, now that they've kind of gotten rid of blocks or gotten rid of core sets. But I think the return to I think it's also story relevance, right? To some extent, is like I think Eldraine was set up, in the story in Eldraine with Oko was set up to be, and whatever's going on with Garrick and whatever is going on with the Kenrith is kind of set up to be the next thing we do, be it post Phyrexia, be it Oko is this big bad guy, be it something to do with Garrick, be, whatever that is. He is also like the last of the original 5 planeswalkers that hasn't like been really a main character. He's like been on the sides other than a core set that was his focus. So it'll be interesting to see what we do with Eldraine versus Tarkir, which I know that has been kind of mentioned, is like one of the problems with Tarkir is the part of Tarkir that's beloved doesn't exist anymore. And how do you tell that story of it returning if you're doing it in a single set? Because you can't do kind of what they learned, that Battle for Zendikar is a bad idea, right? You don't want to go to the return. You don't want to return to the bad version of a plane. And you could do it in a 2-set thing, which then takes up the whole fall. They are proving that that's a possible situation. The other thing that I think is interesting is that, and this is a massive tangent than what we were planning on talking about, but Mark Rosewater, Light Humphreys, and I think Gavin, all 3 of them all posted like within a week of each other, something along the lines of, if we were going to go back in time and do a, like, similar how we just did Brothers War, if we were going to go back in time to see a different plane, where would you want us to go? And a lot of the responses to that were Fate Reforged era Tarkir.
And they are all wrong, because we got to go back to Mercadia. And I will stump that all day long.
Is Mercadia destroyed? Can't we just go there and it's around?
Well, here's the thing.
This time travel.
This is the answer that you can apply for Tarkir. Just show up 20 years before everything happens. And so you could just have it be like a prequel. And so, there's plenty of space for Mercadia to be the next kind of redemption arc, because we had it with Kamigawa. For years they kept saying it was the most unsuccessful set. It's hard to convince the powers that be to go back. And they came back, and it was amazing. It was Neon Dynasty was so fun and so fantastic. And there's no reason why we can't go back to this kind of like airship seafaring place of Mercadia. Granted, I think one of the main challenges with this, outside of the fact that it's a set from even beyond when most people playing Magic now are unfamiliar, is that Ixalan, I feel like, has picked up the mantle as that kind of seafaring, swashbuckling sort of Magic set.
Sure.
That Mercadia was originally, because there was so much nautical related stuff, with the Rishadan port, the Sapraza in islands, that kind of stuff. But personally, I think we deserve to go back.
No. My point more was we don't need time travel to go back.
Yeah.
Right. Like we could just go to Mercadia right now, and it wasn't destroyed by Phyrexians. It just exists, and a lot of stuff has maybe happened, and I think that would be a really cool thing to do. But I think the point was more like, if you have to use time travel, right? You have to go to a time period that something like going to Wrath before everything that happened in the Weatherlight Saga, or going to Shards of Alara before not even just before they were brought back together, but before they were split the first time. There's all of these cool, which that is the question for all the people commenting, which time travel plane would you go to? Travis would pick Mercadia.
Any day of the week. any day of the week.
Which sounds more like you just want to go there no matter what the prompt is. We're doing a return set.
It doesn't matter. Like, you could do the very beginning of the plane, the end. I don't care. Like, I want to get back to like that kind of Mediterranean feel of, it kind of like seafaring style set there.
So how much time has passed since we were last at Mercadia?
Honestly, I have no idea.
Okay. Let me think. So it was it's the beginning of the Cabal story, right? It's like the right after, just post the Phyrexian storyline, which I believe is over 1,000 years. I think we've like passed that 1,000-year mark. I'm asking because if it is, then that means Mercadia could just be Ixalan. There's an entire
we could draw a dotted line. Sure.
Conquistador spawning, famously from a Mediterranean part of the world,
the upside
section
down mountain,
of Ixalan that we don't know anything about, that has a bunch of vampires. And I would bet that if I looked up Mercadia, there's a vampire in that set, and there's pirates.
There is something beautiful to the kind of, the realms of magic kind of interacting with each other. Because when I wrote an article about, magic's depictions of life on the plains, I was looking at the Daru clerics in Onslaught. And so we know them as far as like having like the hats and the armor made out of like the high grass, like the reeds and everything. And they worshipped this, this spirit in the sky. I'm blanking on the name of the spirit, but they had this like kind of angelic, this kind of spiritual, deity that they prayed to. And it turns out they were actually just praying to Sarah. And so they didn't know that, but like all Sarah Sanctum and everything that we know from like Urza's saga and all that was just floating above these planes, and here are all these people, looking up and worshiping it. And so it was like the two different things kind of overlapping each other, despite being, years and years apart. So there could be some overlap that happens with the Venn diagram there.
I think one of my favorite moments in Ixalan block, outside of like being excited for the specific tribes they'd chosen, because it was like a who's of things that I wanted to see be big in Magic for basically my entire time playing up to that point, other than maybe vampires because they were already a thing.
Sure.
Merfolk, dinosaurs, and and pirates. But Azor being the final villain of that arc, and it being like, oh, this massive planeswalker character that we all know because of the Azorius and what's going on Ravnica, he's the thing that's here. And that was such a big like brain blast. So Ixalan, famous for having big reveals like that. And there was a vampire, and it was Evankar, was a vampire in Master Block. So there were vampires. He could be the original vampire on this plane, and just over the 3,000 years, the name of the plane itself had changed and became, the continent of Mercadia had been overrun by vampires. Shenanigans ensue. That would be wild. I don't know. Okay, so Innistrad.
Innistrad, yes. Innistrad. Back to the spooky stuff.
Please check out our sponsor TCG Player with using our affiliate link below. Please check out Hipsters of the Coast and for what Travis is doing, and check out everything that we're on Channel Fireball. That's where these articles get posted as well, and all of the other good things. And Patreon. There's a whole pre-show. We talked about biking and how it's important to balance your hobbies between Magic and other things. All of that in the pre-show on our Patreon for all Patreon subscribers. Plus, you get a cool altar sleeve of me attacking Ben with Force Lightning and him being Luke Skywalker. If you're a Patreon member over, I think, $5, you get it for free for October, November, December, and January. So make sure to check that out as well. All right. Now we're doing Innistrad.
Cool.
So one of the things that we talked about before is its influence in general on Modern, and just kind of banger after banger of cards, both from this block, that just like have been so influential to the format.
Yeah, and like in doing some research for this episode, I was finding just this like amazing kind of ripple effect on all different corners of the Magic space, and Innistrad itself represented this kind of watershed moment where things were kind of branching out. Like, for instance, EDH, was called at the time, Commander as we know it now, was in its infancy, and that was right around when the first Commander decks were coming out. And so this was at that point when we started to see certain staples that became long-standing Commander stuff, like Parallel Lives, Deadeye Navigator, although it's no longer the staple that it once was, and things like Cavern of Souls, that kind of stuff, and like all of that stuff comes from Innistrad block in particular. But at least when it comes to Innistrad itself, there's countless, heavyweights that we've seen, say, influence the modern format in particular, namely things like Liliana the Veil, Snapcaster Mage, that sort of stuff, Champion of the Parish. There's just a laundry list of things that Innistrad has left its mark, despite being something from 2011.
Well, and like, even to your point on Commander, it's kind of this watershed moment in the sense that, like, after Shards of Alara block, which was definitely a beginning of Commander exploding, Wizards didn't realize that and decided we will not have any gold cards for over a year and a half. The first one being Glissa and Tezzeret in Mirrodin Besieged, and then New Phyrexian, I think, had Jor Kadeen and maybe one other that I'm not remembering off the top of my head.
Sure.
But Innistrad was this first moment where you're like, oh no, here are 4 flagship, or I guess it was 3. Here are 3 flagship legendary creatures, plus Mikaeus being the human one that was mono white. And werewolves we'll get to in a second. But here it is, and they were a massive success. All Grimgrim, Olivia, and Geist are these kind of big 3 shonen protagonists of Innistrad block, where like they really allowed people to kind of like attach themselves to these characters in the first time. And I think Wizards learned that lesson kind of moving forward, where you have these faction leaders existing, and even on the modern side, Modern was created relatively quickly after the set came out, and the effect that Innistrad basically had with Snapcaster Liliana, being arguably 2 of the 5 most iconic cards in the format forever, out the gate, kind of just like setting the tone.
Yeah, and it wasn't even just when it comes to like looking at the rares and everything. Like, sure, we had stuff like Champion of the Parish and Snapcaster and all that, but we also had things like, say, Delver of Secrets. Think Twice was also a common thing. Yeah, obviously, we don't have to get too far into the other blocks, but there's even things like, say, Bump in the Night that ended up showing up in that black-red burn deck for a while. Like, there's all sorts up and down the rarity charts for Innistrad. There are lasting tools that have come and gone in, say, the modern format, all from this one particular set. And I think there's a fascinating design element behind this, in that there are some designs that we've seen that have still stood the test of time, but others that are just kind of deemed not good enough. And then some stuff from this era of Magic design have just been completely banned. But they all lived under the same roof. Like, say, for instance, if we look at Dark Ascension, like you have, say, Fateless Looting, which was banned in Modern, for instance, and it's obviously a very polarizing topic there, but that's right alongside, say, Lingering Souls, which is like one of the fairest possible cards you can think of, and just kind of like a solid build around. There's so much that goes into it, and it seems like such a fascinating challenge to look at, like to kind of understand what was going on through the design team at the time when building these particular sets here.
Yeah, and it like, you talk about like Thought Scour, right? We like randomly discover yearly cards from these sets. The fact that Geralf's Messenger is a modern staple right now, one of the top 5 best decks in the format, and hadn't seen play in Modern before Yawgmoth was printed, like, is a testament to kind of like some of the stuff that's possible. Gravecrawler, like and like the other side of like Unburial Rites, stuff that like has fallen out of favor, but at different times in Modern were key cards to the format. And like, it would be interesting to see, and maybe editor, if I think about doing it, what percentage of like rares from this set have just seen Modern play, just like not even like massive Modern play, but just some amount to some extent, has to be like high compared to others. And some of that comes with the land cycle, the fact that like beyond just the fact that you have the enemy check lands, which this is the first time those were printed, you also have the rare tap gold spell cycle lands, where you have Loot House, and you have Gavany Township, and you have Kessid Wolf Run, and you have Slayer Stronghold. Yeah, and like these are all cards that I've seen a ton of play. And in some ways, this like deck, it didn't invent archetypes. Like the Delver archetype is fascinating, right? That's one to me that I think is like, it was a big player in Standard. Delver then kind of has never made it big in Modern, because after the first event that Modern had, they banned Ponder and Preordain out from under it, and without that and Brainstorm, just Delver of Secrets doesn't work as a card. It's a really interesting time. I mean, I think that era in general is kind of in my head, I feel like it's the Disney Renaissance of Magic the Gathering, from like Shards of Alara block to really Khans of Tarkir almost, I think, because like Battle for Zendikar, I think, is like the end of that moment, where like Battle for Zendikar was the beginning of like the storytelling epics really happening. Where not only did we establish in 3 sets in a row the major, or 4 of 3 sets in a row, 3 of the 4 sets in a row, 3 of the major villains of Magic's future, with Shards of Alara introducing Nicol Bolas back, Zendikar introducing the Eldrazi, and then Scars of Mirrodin introducing the Phyrexian. No, 3 in a row. That was 1, 2, 3. Then we do Innistrad and then Theros. But you introduced some of the most iconic planes of all time. You introduced like one of the first, like, and I think this is one of the reasons Innistrad is so successful. It's the first top-down set in 20 years, right? Like basically it was like Rabia and Arabian Nights, and then they didn't do a top den flavor set until they got to Innistrad. And it like whatever comes with that vein not being tapped came with just like oozing amount of creativity and the ability to link both flavor and mechanic and players' expectations in a way that wasn't possible before. And that also allowed you to create spells that you think wouldn't have been possible, I guess.
Yeah, well, like, I mean, they did lean heavily in the top-down approach with the original Kamigawa, but I mean, it was obviously rarely unsuccessful. And so perhaps you could say that like Innistrad was like a very shining example of a really successful Magic set when it's guided from that top-down approach. Like, I know there was that design story, I think it was Mark Rosewater on a Drive to Work podcast, was saying about how they took a bunch of, they just, they sat in a room with a whiteboard and wrote down a bunch of horror tropes like Jar of Eyeballs, Black Cat, Village Cannibals, this kind of thing. And they just wrote all these particular tropes that they knew and understood, as well as borrowing from literature like The Invisible Man, Frankenstein, werewolves, and that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden this stuff started coming in. But the beauty of this confluence of these two particular ideas is the fact that the set is just so good and so fun to play. And it's like, you can have something that was like really busted from years before, like Mirrodin block, even just coming off of, say, New Phyrexia, when we had Phyrexian mana, and there was all these particular mistakes that happened and things like that. The mental misstep ban happening in Standard, just like, I don't know, I think a couple weeks or a month before Innistrad was released. But then all of a sudden,
the summer before Innistrad is Cobblade Summer.
Yeah.
Right. Splinter Twin was a legal combo in the Standard before Innistrad was released.
Yeah, and then just this seismic shift in what had happened. And like, to get back to the Delver thing in particular, it's a fascinating change in what Delver did, at least when it comes to like Legacy in particular. Like, you look at, it's a couple years ago, they had, right during the height of, say, like the Snowco era, and where you had, Oko, you had Arkham's Astrolabe and Legacy and everything. And I remember playing Legacy Humans at my LGS in Northern Virginia, where I was living at the time, fighting through all that stuff with Meddling Mage and all that. But so they had I think it was MTG Goldfish, had a pre-Innistrad Legacy event, because Innistrad had just so much of an effect on Legacy with Liliana the Veil, with Delver of Secrets in particular. And it's amazing how just this innocuous common, this fugitive wizard that turns into a 3/2 flyer, it was a way of just weaponizing all of the best cantrips in Legacy in that kind of blue-red shell. And it continues to this day with being such a emblematic card with that. I mean, yes, it has been in some cases supplanted by Dragon's Rage Channeler, but it's amazing just how long its reign has been, both in Legacy and in Pauper, and unfortunately not in Modern because the cantrips aren't very good.
Yeah, and Modern has found analogous cards, right? Like not Death Rage Shaman. Death Shadow has been kind of the Delver of Secrets of Modern for
That's
years. That feels like a Innistrad card.
It very well could be, because there's so many cards that like seem like they should exist in another space, but all of a sudden, bam, here they are.
Next time we go to Innistrad Wizards, let's get a Death Shadows reprint in the standard.
Sure.
I don't know why you couldn't. That card's not good unless you have fetch lands and shock lands together and Thoughtseize, and then it's broken. But and there's all like it is interesting when you look at the set, because the next is tribes, right? Because it's an interesting feature of Innistrad where, kind of like Ixalan, it was, hey, we're going to do tribal, but it's going to be 5 tribes we've most of the time have not done before. Mm-hmm. Or not our merfolk or goblin or elves or whatever. It was zombies, which have been done before pretty consistently. Sure. It was vampires, which had just recently been introduced as the main black. These are the people that have cities tribe or group. And then, but with werewolves, you know, there have been 3 werewolves or 2 werewolves ever printed before then, and both of them were like 20 years before,
sure,
like early Magic era. And with spirits, you have like kind of what I refer to as like one of the 5 rainbow tribes, where they're like, and the other one being humans, or another one of those being humans, where both of them have been everywhere, but have not really been focused on, and that especially with humans, where this is the first time they had human tribal ever created, and moved the thing to the generic group that like didn't really have a connection to a legacy playable deck, to a modern playable deck, to one of the most powerful tribes in one of the most powerful creature types in Magic, to the extent where I asked what's everyone's favorite creature type yesterday on Twitter, and by and large the 2 most popular answers were humans and slivers, and which was surprising to me because I get that they're powerful, but they're boring. Why would you like humans? Pick Noggles like a sane person.
Well, I think there's a beauty in liking the humans. And I mean, I'm a little bit biased because I have played the humans deck for so many years, both in Modern and Legacy. But like, there's something about that kind of thing where it's like, here's a bunch of people that are just like some random person with a funny hat, and maybe they have a wizard staff, and they're going up against like a Tarmogoyf or something, or some kind of wild thing. There's some flavor thematic thing that you can get behind with a bunch of like people just getting together, you know, trying to, you know, accomplish a goal together.
Humans are interesting because they have there's a design issue that Wizards came upon during original Mirrodin, which was if everything doesn't have a color, you know, if everything is colorless, then or if playing 5 color is easy, which is what happened in Khan's block, then the format in standard at least becomes bad, because it's not about, there's just one deck, and that deck isn't necessarily synergistic to be one deck to be the best. It's just, oh, this deck is playing every good card, it's playing the top 20 best cards in the format, and it just, that's what the deck is, and there's no way for anything else to compete because of that. And humans, which is interesting, have that problem almost, because as soon as you give them enough of a synergy of there's a reason to play them together, you now get to look at every set, and a lot of the time the best card from that set has a high chance of just happening to be a human. Snapcaster Mage is a human. And so it was so fascinating when that deck just, when we went to Shadows over Innistrad block, which is what really gave it the second human tribal push needed to become a modern relevant deck, was like, oh, if you just have like 8 good things that make it so playing only humans is good, or 12 if you include Cavern of Souls, now you're just going to play a bunch of really good cards, and they'll get to become 6/6s for free at some point, and so you win games because of that.
Yeah, and I find that it is fascinating because like I guess I am a little bit salty at having gone through, having the modern five color humans deck, sleeved and ready to roll, going through COVID, getting excited about playing modern again in paper, and then all of a sudden, I don't even see my deck on the front page of MTG Goldfish anymore, and so I think I think we are at least a couple of years out of that era of like, oh no, it's a human. And the signpost of that, I believe, was when Deputy Detention was a Vidalcan wizard and not a human. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
that lost me a game in particular at SCG Philadelphia by by one life against an Eldrazi Toronto player. But nevertheless, it seems like right now to dive back a little bit into the episode you folks did a month ago about like stuff that's say no longer modern playable. I think Fury is one of those particular things, Fury and Solitude and all of the amazing, amazing free spells that we have now in the format that has kind of quietly pushed, humans out. And regardless of what has come out, I mean, there's been all these really cool designs. There just still hasn't been anything to really come around where the format has gone. And so I feel like the human stack in any capacity, whether it be modern, whether it be legacy or even pioneer, it's going to need a lot to come around to what we have right now. Because I mean, another thing in particular is that the challenge with human decks is that they're doing both everything and nothing at the same time. They
Right.
are all over the place, and like Slivers gets away with that because they're five colors. They all give abilities and everything. But like if you look at like a Goblins deck, it's like okay, it's like a little bit of aristocrats. They all kind of care about each other. You throw a bunch and do some burn. But like you have with humans, you have everything from like Tomek to Comball to Lavinia to Kitesail Freebooter, and they're kind of like trying to spread out too much. And unless there's really that kind of binding agent, if that binding agent is good enough, like a Thalia's Lieutenant, then it's great. But if it's not good enough, then all the pieces just fall apart really
Right.
quickly. It seems like that's been the case for the past couple of years.
And I think it we've talked about this before, like what makes it so that a creature type based synergistic deck becomes viable in modern, right? Like what is the line that pushes it over? And often and it's always like over, especially over the other ones that are around, because there's always a few of these decks that are good. And elves has always been one of them, but then has also fallen out of favor. Humans was a big one, and it's always kind of like there's two versions, right? There's like the monocolor or the two color classic ones, which are the like merfolk, goblins, elves, etc. And then there's these five color piles, which I count like spirits, elementals, humans, and slivers are kind of the four. And slivers has done like has top eight, I think, AGP once. But the other three were at different times very defining features of the format, now being elementals. Um, and it has almost always been one of two things, right? They something gets printed that creates a synergy that didn't exist before. That is always a part of it, because they often will attack on, I am playing a basic creature beatdown deck that does another thing. What is that other thing? It's different, but it's doing something else. With humans, it was playing these creatures that basically disrupted your hand from being able to interact with it, as they just generically each one was able to kind of, it was almost a hate bears deck in some ways that it was able to do. Merfolk is a land destruction deck. You don't think about it, but that's why Merfolk is so good. And then also all of its creatures outclass, like make it so Fury is not the best card against you on the planet the way that it is other creature decks. Now, why it's doing so well now. Elves is making just so much mana. How much mana can you make? A lot. Goblins has the Snoop combo. Goblins
Yeah.
was probably, of all of these, the weird. I mean, outside of zombies and vampires who have never been good at modern, but of the ones that have been good at some point, the one that like has always been this weird, like took the longest to get there, and it took them printing a one card, as long as you have another card on top of your deck, 2 card combo, to creating that deck archetype. And so it always is just like the right card. So even with humans, we could be years from humans being back as a modern deck, right? Or we could be the next Innistrad set we go to, and instead of the next Innistrad set's main human mechanic being like power and toughness being bigger than the other one, the like more limited focused combat mechanic, it's you get to Thoughtseize your opponent every time you play a human or something. And like, for instance, Elementals, if someone was like, oh yeah, Elementals is going to be the dominating creature archetype deck, I would have been like, how? Like, compared to Spirits, like how is it going to be flying flash creatures with counter spells attached to them?
Yeah.
And like, oh, it's by printing a cycle of 5 free removal spells that cost nothing and draw you 3 cards when you cast them. That's how you do it. So it's I think like humans, for instance, humans can come back at the moment they print like a flash human that counters free spells, right? Like that just like is a good beater on the ground without having to do that. So I'm interested to see how that works, but and that's one of the beauties of Innistrad, where like it kind of did with its first run and its return show somewhat how to do this. With Spirits, it gave Spell Queller and it gave this instant speed gameplay to Spirits that then got to capitalize on both Kamigawa and the first run we were here. Humans was Thalia's Lieutenant and giving enough power to it. It's interesting that both zombies and vampires have never been these key features of the modern. With vampires, I feel like it's partially just the mechanical space they've played in all 3 times are the most parasitic of the different mechanics. Like the first time we were in Innistrad, vampires were just about doing damage to your opponent and they got bigger, which is like very limited focus, which is not parasitic, just isn't like not doing anything.
Strong Kirk Noble kind of stuff. It gets a little bit bigger. It's kind of like the foundation of like a little one drop that snowballs, that kind of thing.
You like, in reality, it more created the aristocrats archetype than the
definitely.
vampires created a vampire archetype. And then the second time around was so madness focused, and madness is such a hard deck to be constructed eternal playable. Like the power level of a madness card almost has to be problematic by the time it gets to the point where it's going to be modern playable.
Definitely.
Because just like you have to be wanting to play this card that is going to need to be discarded as almost a 2-card combo. Like you almost need a like Splinter Twin. I guess that would be it. They printed a Splinter Twin, but it costs like 8 mana, but it has Madness 4. And then they also printed a Pestermite that like you can play this with. When this enters the battlefield, you may discard a card to untap. I don't even think that works. I don't know. I don't know what I'm creating. But the tribal mechanics of what they were trying to do. And then the last thing is flip cards. Well, not the last thing, because I do want to talk about Flashback, but one of the big, or let's talk about mechanics, the mechanics of Innistrad, because I think the mechanics were a big part of it between Flashback and double-sided cards that with double-sided cards opened up such a big vein of design space, right? That you now have the ability to create all of these really cool ideas and cards that previously were too clunky to do or too many words to do. And then, and gave you the power of werewolves, and werewolves themselves have never made it. And partially, I think, if I'm being honest, they have a combination. One of the problems is that they like day and night cycle idea was a bad one. And I think everyone, including Wizards, agrees that was one of the big mistakes of the return to Innistrad this last time.
Unfortunately.
Which was partially just like, hey, to make werewolves flipping the way they do work on Arena, there's a much simpler way to do it, but it makes it not work with regular ones. That was a mistake.
It was also a very difficult mechanic for Commander. Like I had a werewolves deck well before in Shred Midnight Hunt, and it was just so bad. And like I remember writing an article about it, and I had found that the only way to really build a viable werewolves deck was to make a red-green like prison deck. So,
right.
Any kind of like rule of law effect or, Rurik Thar kind of thing. And then to punish enough people, and then, hey, the werewolves can flip and we actually can do stuff.
It's they're so inherently good for like 1v1 limited play. They're such a fun limited mechanic that just like if you mentioned I think you mentioned it during the podcast. You maybe mentioned it before, how Innistrad like kind of famously doesn't have very parasitic mechanics, which I think is one of
Yeah.
the reasons it's been able to expand, except for the werewolf group. And they do work well with like things that have mana dumps in them, but from a perspective of like they are trying to do their own thing, and that own thing doesn't translate well to Commander, isn't very powerful for Modern unless just you're playing a generically good thing that does a generically good thing, like Huntmaster of the Fells. And so it is interesting. The one thing I would say is interesting about the return to Innistrad, the most recent one, with Midnight Hunt, is they had the opportunity to really be like, okay, how do werewolves work in Commander? How do we make these interesting? And they didn't do it. They almost like, in my head it feels like they were like, okay, we have two big products we're doing right now, Arena and Commander, and they decided to make the decision that werewolves for this set are going to be Arena focused, partially probably because they had to program Arena regardless, so they chose the thing that they
Yeah.
had to do. And then like with the Commander product they released, they like kind of didn't make the decision to do a Commander deck or Commander play style focused version of them. But I do think that hurts the group now in general from a PR perspective, which I'm now imagining a werewolf PR agent like on the phone.
Yeah, you can't call them after a certain hour because you're just going to hear over the
Yeah.
phone, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean it is tough because like we're talking about like a card game designed by a bunch of human beings that have their own thoughts and aspirations and their own hopes and dreams and fears and everything, and there's only so much delineation you can do between them. Like sure, like we have we all know that slivers kind of help each other out. We know goblins kind of just throw themselves at something. Like some of those kind of creature types are very comfortable and easily defined, but like for a werewolf thing, it's so difficult to just kind of do it right without it being just completely busted and terrible for a lot of parties involved. So yeah, I'm willing to extend some graces and extend some flexibility for that kind of thing, because it seems like it would be just an absolute nightmare to try and figure out like, okay, well we have a new set and we got to make homerids a thing. How do we make homerids unique? And it's like, well, we got to fit them in between spirits and like illusions and find something in between. So it's hard, but I think they're trying to do what they can. But yeah, it's a very it is. I think it is one of the kind of the larger disappointments that we didn't necessarily get some kind of really fascinating werewolf style deck, because it is so emblematic for this kind of creature type here. Oh, in all honesty, like my werewolf commander deck that I played for like a couple of years, I just used Immerwolf as my commander. I just had rule zeroed, and that was great. That's all I wanted. I just wanted Immerwolf as a commander. The one that they came out with, it's fine. It's got draw a card on it and everything, but yeah, it's so difficult to get that stuff right, and it's not necessarily a job I envy. Trying to throw a dart at a dartboard and hope that several million people are happy with what you did.
It's and we haven't talked a lot about Avacyn Restored, but it's one of the lessons that I wish they took from Avacyn Restored that I think they like. Not a lot. They took lessons that Avacyn Restored is bad, and there are pieces to it that I wish maybe they pulled from, because I think they created the solution to the werewolf problem on there, and that's the Wolfear. Which for people who don't know, in Avacyn Restored, when the angels came back, the werewolves actually got locked into their werewolf, or a portion of the werewolves got locked into their werewolf forms, and they became these basically sentient werewolf people called Wolfear. And there's like a 5-mana one that has Soul Bond +3/+3, and then there's the 3-mana Flash Regenerate one. And I think you could do a legendary Wolfear and just like and they're just the first werewolf, and that's actually what's going on here. And they're red green, and or maybe they're Jund if you want, and there you go. And now you have your and have it just be Immerwolf, right? Or have it be like the Moon Mist effect, but activated as an activated ability or something. There's things you could do there. So I think there's like an interesting way to do it. I think from a modern perspective, I think just like the werewolf mechanic is a little too clunky to ever get there. Though like the fact that Mayor Averbrook was a key feature to the humans deck in the early days of it being a modern deck is one of my favorite things about the deck.
Oh yeah, like it was cool, but granted, it only really lasted until they realized that you could do Phantasmal Image, and then you could copy your Thalia's Lieutenant or make a second, Mantis Rider kind of thing. But it did, Mayor of Averbrook did have its time in the sun for what it's worth.
Yeah. Honestly, if Mayor Averbrook was a red-green legend, I think that would also fix the problem.
Yeah, that's
Like
true.
they do kind of all of the things you need. Uh but and then the last, not the last mechanic because there were a few, but with the transform mechanic, the other big mechanic to me that I think is one of the reasons Innistrad was so successful. It was like the first time they returned to the flashback ever. Right. I think it is the like other than Time Spiral, which was its wonky mess that
Sure.
it was, after they realized, hey, we should do a return mechanic every set. We should make sure we have one mechanic that's coming back because there's all of these really popular mechanics throughout history. Let's focus on having that be a feature of why never return to flashback? Why never do cycling again?
Yeah.
And flashback to me is maybe the best mechanic ever created. I think your arguments are kicker, flashback, and cycling, and I don't
Yeah.
like kicker, and cycling makes cards more boring.
Yeah, especially when it's just like, let me just see what else is in. Let me open up the refrigerator door to see if something else is in there when it's the same food that are in all, it's in there all the whole time.
But then flashback like creates such interesting decisions. You can play stuff like Liliana the Veil and Faithless, not Faith, well, and Faithless Looting, but and Lingering Souls. You can play with Burial Rites and Gifts Ungiven. You can do everything that Faithless Looting did, right? You can play with your graveyard in a way, and kind of going back to the beginning of this whole conversation, the Burning Vengeance blue red limited deck, or
Yeah.
the Spider Spawning deck, where you get to look at cards differently and how they interact with the game. Shivam, mentioned like, I don't understand how the blue red deck plays. Like, I can't, like, I'm not, my version of playing Magic doesn't love discarding value.
Hmm.
Even though, in the way that flashback works, you're able to say, no, I'm most discard effects they're using discard as a cost to gain a benefit, and flashback says you actually get to draw two cards. This collective brutality isn't escalating to make me discard a cards to gain value. It's no, I'm getting all three of these options, and I'm putting two cards in my graveyard that let me ostensibly draw two additional cards. And that mechanic on its own is really exciting, and then add the layer of Wizards just going ham with it, like all these iconic cards all at once.
Well, and there's also, I think, a certain beauty to it in that you have certain things like, say, I think it's Mystic Retrieval, and I was looking this up because I'm interested in picking up, the Dan list as far as like blue red or blue black, but like how you have a flashback cost be a different color, or like say Forbidden Alchemy, one of the main signpost cards for Innistrad Limited, going with like the 6 and a black flashback cost there. So like it had a similar thing that you could argue then informed certain decisions, perhaps with Tarkir block, with how they had some of those legends, like say Yasova Dragonclaw, that was just green to cast, but then the blue red hybrid activated ability, and so you have like the kind of steering people in a particular direction for their experience with how they interact with the game there. So it is interesting when it's there's like a conscious decision to put not just like think twice where it's blue, one and a blue to flashback the same, draw a card spell, but like, looking at a different, doing, oh, this is like red to flashback this blue card, that kind of thing. It's fascinating having that kind of thing show up in your design space and what kind of decks that ends up creating.
And I do think also like flashback led them into probably, I think it was the first graveyard themed set in general in a very long time. I think I'm very bad at old set names, but the
Okay,
Threshold
so
set.
well, yeah, so you had odd. All right, so you had this is where we'll get full boomer here. So you had Odyssey that had it was very much graveyard focus, and that got into Threshold and everything, but then there was like say Judgment and Torment that had a lot of Threshold stuff going on as well, and so you had famous cards like Firebolt and stuff like that, Nimble Mongoose come out and everything. So yeah, like getting stuff into the graveyard and using your graveyard as like a second hand, so to speak. And then subsequently the sadness you feel when your werebear is no longer a 4/4 for 2, when it gets, when your graveyard gets wiped. But yeah, they definitely kind of, you can see like the kind of breadcrumbs that they laid out from before and how they successfully implemented it with things like Flashback
Well,
and Innistrad.
and that's that block, not the original because there's ones before that, but that big graveyard block is famous for being extraordinarily fun for spikier players or for players that were very ingrained in draft. But for new players or for players that weren't totally on board, was less welcoming. And I think Wizards over the next 10, 20 years, or 10 years, was testing different lessons with the Golgari and what Time Spiral on like different things you could do.
Yeah.
And then by the time they got the Innistrad, they're like, okay, how do we make a graveyard set, but that is understandable and fun for newer players or for players of all different skill level. And I think one thing that just graveyard decks in general, graveyard sets in general, that almost more recent ones have failed to do as well as Innistrad did, is they benefit depth of knowledge of the format in a way that's fun for everyone. It's new players get to draw cards twice because they get to play flashback spells they get to play, and they have fun with it. But strategic players get to like self mill in Innistrad. They get to use discard differently in Innistrad. They get to play around with that. And I think that specific feature is the thing that has been missing from subsequent revisits to the format. At least in my opinion, close with Shadows. Shadows is great, but Madness is a little bit more on rails as far as that type of mechanic goes. Like there is a very simple, obviously written out for you way to take advantage of a Madness card.
Yeah.
That's not true with Flashback. You can do what you did with Madness with Flashback, but you can also self-mill. You can just cast it. You can find cards that entomb cards into your graveyard. You can, you can have these cards be resistant to counter magic your opponent is playing because you get a crack back at the second half if they deal with the first half. You get to play with Morbid, where when a creature dies, you get a benefit from it. So now you want to be playing with stuff that lets you sacrifice stuff. And I think that self mill aspect of Innistrad is almost the one feature that feels like it's been missing as we've done returns to these graveyard mechanics. And now I haven't played Brothers War. We talked about before the show, like for some reason it's this black hole of magic for me. I've been very busy for the last 3 weeks. So I do know that like Unearth is back and maybe this type of strategy is available in that format. But
A little bit, yeah.
even like, and the places that I think got closest are stuff like not Ixalan, Amonkhet. But I think Amonkhet also has like some of the cooler drafted environments that you can play.
Oh yeah, super fun draft environment, and it's like how to do and how to interact and build like a kind of a graveyard, a sort of death and life and renewal sort of set without it being just so unbelievably busted, and or also having it be like so many misses because like the mechanics maybe don't work, or because like a thing with say like Judgment for instance or Torment, those kind of smaller sets in that era of say Odyssey block where they were so focused on the graveyard is like you have a mechanic like Threshold where yeah it makes sense in theory, but then all it takes is just having your graveyard wiped once and your Nimble Mongoose going from a 3/3 down to a 1/1, and it's like such a huge like feels bad. And so like you can make graveyard mechanics and make them kind of exciting to kind of like do the thing, but if it all just kind of wipes away once the graveyard disappears, then that's tough. But like flashback is such a beauty in that you can have you have the ability to at least cast the thing with priority and get to do stuff and kind of have agency in the game, even if you don't have a lot of cool stuff in your hand. And so it's such a testament on how Innistrad, in terms of the design itself, allowed people ways to have fun and ways to engage with the game, even if they didn't really have a lot of cool stuff to look at while they were waiting to plan out their turn there.
Yeah, and one of the things I was afraid about kind of coming into this episode was, and it was kind of one of the ideas we had to begin with was, oh, is it just going to suck because Innistrad has been outclassed because Snapcaster Mage and Liliana, these two classically iconic cards from the format, don't see a lot of play. Grizzlebrand has been replaced as the number one Reanimator target. Faithless Looting is banned. Lingering Souls is no longer the value engine card that it was. But then you provided a very nice list of every great card in the set. And I honestly don't think it has. I think like there's so much legacy here, from Cavern of Souls to Thought Scour to where's the zombie Gravecrawler to Geroff's Messenger, or Geroff. I'm never gonna know how to say that one correctly, and I
It's
don't
like
care to
GIF
learn.
or GIF,
Yeah.
let it ride. Just do whatever you please.
It's Geef, actually, is the correct way.
Yeah,
People are
Geef,
pronouncing
okay.
the I wrong.
Yeah,
Everyone gets stuck on the G. And I also don't, I don't think Snapcaster Mage and Liliana have fallen as far as people think they have, right? I think there's going to be times where both cards are good. I think that what they do hasn't been outclassed specifically. Snapcaster Mage just showed up in a blue red is it list that just because it's good enough to play with Murktide Regent, right? Like there's going to be times these cards make comebacks and do better, and as long as they go away towards variety, and there's a bunch of different blue drops that exist, and a bunch of different mono black planeswalkers, and a bunch of different strategies you can do there, I think that's a net positive. It's a net negative when it's like, no, these cards are bad, but it's only these cards that are good. And so it's going to be interesting to see how Modern kind of reacts to that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's an inherent challenge too. Like, yes, there's a certain love of like seeing like, okay, is this Tiago Chun, and we have Snapcaster Mage, and like I myself have had a long storied career of getting blown out by somebody just casting Snapcaster Mage and then casting a lightning bolt and blowing up my Goblin Pile Driver or whatever. Like that's definitely a thing, but it's eventually, yeah, we have to embrace that certain things will get, we'll have to move on and we'll have to depart from them. But there are certain other enduring things, say from Innistrad Block in particular, that have stuck with us. Maybe less exciting than, say, Snapcaster Mage. Like, we still have, like, Grafdigger's Cage is still an enduring thing, Geroff's Messenger, Gravecrawler, Young Wolf, all that sort of stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if over time the areas in which we pull from Innistrad in particular is just kind of shifts. Depends on what is good right now. And there is something cool about how Liliana of the Veil has come back in both Standard and Pioneer, because like maybe there's a new life that card can discover, even if it's in different formats. There's still someone that can get hooked from that particular experience.
Well, no, I mean we are in a weird moment where like I spent such a long time in Modern looking at the ban list and hoping things would come off. I'm still do that, not but like looking at Stoneforge Mystic, looking at Jace, looking at Wild Nicodle, looking at Bitter Blossom, being like, are these cards too strong? These are some amazing cards. These are really cool. Maybe they can come off. And I've now evolved into looking at Pioneer and looking at cards that are legal in Modern but have been outclassed, and like just like, can they print Snapcaster Mage into Standard? Can't, like, they printed Liliana of the Veil.
Totally
Can
good.
they print Tarmogoyf in the Standard? I don't even think Tarmogoyf printing into Standard is an issue. I don't think that card's good in Standard. I mean, it's fine, but it's not like anything overtly problematic. And are those cards good to add to Modern or Pioneer? Is it fine that Pioneer doesn't have them? Is Snapcaster Mage and Pioneer even that powerful without Lightning Bolt and Path to Exile? Right, that's a totally different environment for that card to exist in. It's probably good, but it's not snap bolt, bolt snap bolt good. And they've done, Thoughtseize is in Pioneer, Liliana is in Pioneer. They're slowly adding all the good black cards. Where's the good blue and red? Where's the good blue and white cards? like and there's weird cards like Stoneforge Mystic could be printed and probably wouldn't see play.
Yeah.
I don't even like what
What are you going to
equipment.
get with it?
The new lion that's like a scavenging ooze maybe is like the best thing I could think of.
Oh, I guess. Yeah. Lion Sash. I mean, sure, you could.
And like, is that I think that sounds sweet. Give me a format where I'm Stoneforge
Yeah.
listing for Lion Slash instead of Cauldron Complete and any of the swords, because the swords aren't legal, right? Yeah, they're none of Scars of Mirrodin isn't
No, yeah,
included.
Scars of Mirrodin and all that, and Darksteel and everything. I mean, you can play Legacy because you can get Lion Sash with that and Death and Taxes, but yeah, it's like it's this weird thing of like it's only as good as what you can grab with it. Like for instance, I think a fascinating thing when looking back at Innistrad before this episode, I went and looked back because I played a lot of Innistrad Return to Ravnica Standard back when I was in college when this set was out, and it's widely touted as like one of the best standard environments that we've ever had. And I thought like, okay, what, like, I know Reanimator was a thing because of Imperial Rights. What was going on with Grizzlebrand, because I don't really remember seeing it. And I was looking through deck lists and there really wasn't a Grizzlebrand. And like Reanimator wasn't even that much of a big deal because like Imperial Rights is the only reanimation spell you had in the format, and so it's a whole lot to commit to compared to say like Legacy Reanimator with Reanimate and Exhume and stuff like that. And so it is fascinating to see how certain things kind of blossom into something new, and then how certain things kind of like grow and develop. And who knows, maybe we'll see some random gem just get kind of plucked out of this particular era because of some random enabler that gets printed now.
If they printed Faithless Looting without the flashback, right? Or they printed like Faithless Looting, but like draw one, discard two, right? Like that's a wild card to print.
Sure,
But
yeah.
like because Grizzlebrand going out of favor is purely just Faithless Looting got banned, and the time they printed a good Reanimator spell, which was Modern Horizons 2, was specifically printed to make it so Grizzlebrand can't be reanimated with it, right? So you ended up just in a situation where it was like the decks that were previously taking advantage of Grizzlebrand were being held together like Apollo 13 and duct tape with Faithless Looting.
Pretty much.
And were a pile of and to the point, like Grizzlebrand is an insane deck. Like
Sure.
it took every single card in the deck was legal in Modern for basically the entire history of the format. People didn't figure out that deck was even possible for 5 years, and arguably shouldn't have. Like the fact that the Green Shoal ended up being a Modern staple is insane and bad. Maybe, I mean, it was wonderful, but like madmen behind that invention. And before that, the Gorya's Vengeance decks were famously like really Glass Cannony, that like basically you needed to get Faithless Looting on turn one into Grizzlebrand, into Gorya's Vengeance. Otherwise, this deck didn't do anything. And once you lose Faithless Looting, the deck just like that was the duct tape, and we're no longer. I don't want to bring up a different tragic space adventure, but we're no longer Apollo 13.
Yeah.
And it's it's one of the famous things. Like it's one of the reasons I think the Faithless Looting ban, I lean towards it being worse that it was banned than it being legal, which is super debatable, and we could do an entire episode just about should Faithless Looting be legal. But like, yes, Faithless Looting was a fuel for the broken deck multiple times in the format, in the way that Mox Opal was, and the way that other banned cards were. But
Over
it
years too.
also say it again.
Over like several years, like it doesn't matter. Like even though it wasn't that big of a deal at the time, over like a couple of years of like say like the Hogak decks, the Reanimator decks in Legacy, or like you look at like a deck like Dredge or like Phoenix, like yeah, it found a home in so many different places. But like in reality, like Faithless Looting is only as good as the things that it's pitching away. Like in Pauper, for instance, it Faithless Looting really is only a way of filtering away in one particular deck, the Boros Bully deck. You filter away the Squadron Hawks that you get so you can keep all the other cool stuff that you want. Or you bin a Rally the Peasants, which coincidentally is from Innistrad itself here.
I love every time I see Rally the Peasants in the deck, because that card is like underratedly bonkers.
Yeah.
But Yeah, it's the fact that Mardu Pyromancer just is no longer a deck, right? The fact that Grishelbrand died, the fact that that's I think that's a bigger loss than Hogak needing to be banned and maybe Phoenix needing to have been banned, but who we're now in a world past that, and it's kind of one of those things that I hope Wizards recognizes that and figures out a way to print fixed faithless looting, because we haven't gotten it yet, but we could still. And we'll see. I mean, it's definitely one of the like types of cards that I'm always on the lookout for.
So one of the cards I did want to talk to you about is like the prolific rise and the sort of fall, but not really, of Thalia. It's like I've been in love with the card ever since the first person to scoop to me when I was playing Naya Humans back in 2012, and they looked at their hand and they're like, well, I could have done this, but because of the Thalia, and that was it. So I was sold on it since, but it has seemed like Thalia has like practically disappeared from Modern. And it at least with Legacy, when it comes to Death and Taxes, it's one of those cards that, like, yes, of course it's good, but it does seem like it's kind of hanging on by a thread. And now it's gone that route that like Liliana has gone, and potentially Snapcaster is, that it's back into Standard, it's back into Pioneer. It can be anywhere. It's just Youthful Knight, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it like its lack of play in Modern is like entirely on the back of elementals. The fact the best
Yeah.
creature removal spell is no longer a non-creature, which like maybe is an argument all on its own that they should have just been spells and not creatures. And the Thalias of the world and the fact that most creature decks no longer can fight them are hurt due to that. But yeah, to your point, like it was back in Standard. It's now legal in Pioneer. It's if you want to play Thalia, you can in formats that she's good in the right metagame. So um it is a good like point. I mean, like, there's always been the argument, especially because Stoneforge Mystic was banned for so long, that is Thalia actually the real 2-drop? It's the one that's seen more consistent play across all these formats. I think it's just Fury and maybe a little bit Solitude, but I think Solitude's less of an issue. I think like Fury, it's on its own, is just this big inhibitor to stuff like Thalia being good in Modern.
Yeah.
And I do think that Fury, I think I can say this, I think Fury should be banned in Modern. This is maybe a hot take, maybe a furious take. I think that's like obviously a circular conversation, but I think of the 5 elementals, and even the five forces, it's which the 2 forces, if we're being honest. It's the one that is inhibiting the most decks from seeing play that would see play and be totally fair. Right, like it probably has the most detrimental effect on the format as a whole, including humans being kept down, vampires keeping, the Innistrad tribe, spirits, like all of these decks are decks that just,
Spirits, everything.
and like just Fury is single-handedly, and it's not like totally single-handedly, like they printed other good removal into the format, but I think it's the one thing keeping the fair decks down. I've like argued that you could unban,
Is Punishing Fire, you said?
yeah, Punishing Fire. I've been argued a bunch that you could unban Punishing Fire, and I think right now you could. If Fury is legal, Punishing Fire should not be banned. The moment that Fury, because and I also think Punishing Fire would be good against Ragavan and gives red green decks a cool tool that you can use and Jund get whatever. But I think what should happen is Fury should be banned, I guess, is the real answer. Because I just don't think Punishing Fire does anything in a format where there no X1s can see play.
Yeah, and I think like Thalia is such an important thing for balancing out a format, because she's such like a signpost build around, as far as like it's your 2-drop, it's a first strike, it's hard, she's hard to kill, she disrupts people. But I think Thalia is at her best when she's causing a cryptic command to cost 5, or a Kolaghan's command to cost 4, or she's taking Bloodbraid Elf and keeping it so you can't just tap out on turn 4 and then cast something for free, because it's you're not going to be able to pay the piper, so to speak. But the challenge is all those 3 cards that I've mentioned don't really kind of see as much play in the formats in which we engage with, maybe K command, but nevertheless, like I think a challenge with Thalia right now is like, there are just so many good answers at, say, 1 and 2 mana. Even say like Expressive Iteration and Legacy, like you can just filter away what you don't want, find the land that you need to pay the tax, and just go for it, and then just Bolt or Unholy Heat or whatever. So Thalia being challenged, I think, is definitely a challenge that's harming the health of certain constructed formats. And I think when she's good, then that's great, because then you have that kind of mono white low to the ground creature deck that can kind of police those slower, non-creature spell, removal spell heavy deck sort of things. But yeah, her kind of fall for grace, but then sort of rebirth into Pioneer is fascinating. But I think there definitely needs to be. I think she needs to be better in order to keep that kind of fundamental balance. And I'll admit I'm heavily biased. I've been a Thalia fan for over a decade, but I think she's as important as having like a good control deck or a good aggro deck in the format.
So I do think a Thalia exists in Modern that is seeing real play, and it's Hexcatcher Mage, right? The new Merfolk that literally made Merfolk went from being an unviable deck in the format to being a top 15 deck in the format with Dominaria United. Hexcatcher Mage is a big part of that. She does, she is a Thalia plus, right? They give +1/+1 to all Merfolk, but they offer a it's not a soft counter to what Thalia does, which is everything costs a little bit more. It's not a tax effect, but it's a count. It is does basically the same thing, because they at any moment can just counter your spell unless you have 1 mana open. So I do think that, like, if someone was like, hey, I played Modern a ton before COVID, and I have unlimited dollars. Not unlimited dollars, but I have a decent amount of money. I can buy pretty much any deck. Don't recommend to me a Jund, whatever, but like any of the main decks. But I used to play humans, and I don't know what to play anymore. I would point them directly 100% full chestedly at Merfolk right now. The fact that A, it's an Aether Vial deck, B, it's I get all my creatures bigger and beat down deck, but it plays interaction, and it also, like, where humans would meddling mage your hand, Merfolk locks them out of their lands, right? You're playing Spreading Seas like Effector. There's the new Merfolk that is a Spreading Seas attached to a Merfolk. You're playing tap down creatures or playing return effects, and I think that does offer that style of gameplay in a way that is Fury resistant, which, I think one of the other reasons that Blue has a chance, and then Spirits might also have that ability, which I think is maybe an under radar option, is Subtlety is also like the answer to Fury, right? It's we had Nikachu on about a year ago now, and we talked kind of like how Subtlety is the Frost Titan of the elemental cycle, where it's like, it's a bad card unless every one of the other cards in its cycle are seeing play, and then it's the best card to fight them.
That's like, so perfect. Yeah. Because I remember playing against Grave Titan back in Innistrad Return to Ravnica Standard and dealing with that and all that. But
it was hilarious in the day where, like, when spoiler season happened, they're like, Grave Titan, yes, Inferno Titan, yes, Primeval Titan's busted, Sun Titan's gonna be so good in Commander, and it's like a really cool card. Frost Titan is terrible, bulk rare, and then like 6 months later, it's like, oh, and I don't know, I think it was like a month later, it was like, oh right, this is the answer to Primeval Titan. Your own Titan. That's weird. Not to mention land destruction in a Johnny and the blue red, the Jeskai Johnny Frost Titan mana destruction deck. That deck was sick. I love that era of Magic so much. But I agree with you that, like, Thalia should just be good in every Magic format it's in. I think that's like maybe a truism of Magic, and the moment we stepped away from that is the moment we've stepped away from Avacyn. Or God. And if I was in the position of power to manage the format, I would look at, like, okay, how does Thalia, what went wrong here, and how is it fixable, or is it a problem? Like, the thing with Fury and the elementals is they just happen to attack on the one axis Thalia is not ready to protect against, and if they weren't inhibiting other play styles, then there's maybe an argument. Because I actually think, in general, I'd love to actually, like, hear your thoughts on it. I think the increase in good removal that has been brought on by Modern Horizon sets is one of the benefits that they've brought into the format. I think from a competitive play perspective, one of the complaints with Modern was always like, I'm actually just playing roulette. If I get good matchups, I'm great. If I get bad matchups, too bad. And those formats, those sets have brought in a library of good enough generic answers like Force of Negation, like Fury, like Solitude, that allow you to have a flatter matchup perspective at the negative of, all of the value being surrounded by mythics and rares from one set, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could kind of expand that out into the whole concept of like threats and answers. And so like for instance, I've throughout the COVID pandemic, I fell in love with pre-modern as far as the format goes. And that's, very much the boomer format of playing, with the stuff from 1994 to 2003. But that was very much the era of answers and like say like spells and stuff are way better than the creatures. Like you would have things like Fact or Fiction and Counterspell and Daze and Lightning Bolt and all that. And then just random stuff like Weathered Wayfarer or like Lightning Angel. Like how can you expect to play an Exalted Angel, a 6-drop that you have to play morph and then flip over when someone can just Swords to Plowshares them? Like the last event that I played, I registered Blastoderm. And so like that was an era when like the threats were way worse than the answers. But now the threats have gotten just so much better. And in a sense, they're also the answers, at least with these, say the pitch elementals in particular. And so you can both answer stuff and then be a threat afterwards with that. So I think the stuff that they're doing now has pushed the needle from not only making the threats better than they were before, but also making them answers too. And so by putting them together, like how can just like a Colligan's command compete with that? Like how can that compete when you can just flash something in and then ephemerate it, and then all of a sudden you have a double striker that you didn't pay anything for, like say with Fury, for instance, or whatever you're going to be doing, say in the modern format. But yeah, like kind of just streamlining stuff and making it so good. Like, what reason do you have to pay 2 or 3 or 4 for like a Doomblade effect that maybe draws you a card or something like that?
No, it is like, and some of it is, I think they like Wizards overswung in a way that maybe is fine, but is standard is bad when the removal is too good, right? Like
Sure.
that I think is a thing that they've learned, where like, oh, if the removal in standard is dominating, control will just like destroy the other decks, and that does make a boring format. And so they looked at Modern Horizon sets as like, okay, we can't print Counterspell into standard. Can we print it into modern? And that's their way around it. But so last thing on Innistrad, just because I want to make sure we keep the focus around it. If
Sure.
if you could print any card from Innistrad into Pioneer, which card that hasn't already been printed, which card would you choose?
That is a very good question.
And I want to hear comments below, everybody. Let me see those Innistrad reprint comments.
Okay, so I'll recognize my bias. I like to play like kind of creature aggro decks. I like to play like super fair, like kind of Thoughtseize, tap back control kind of stuff. So initially, I think of Snapcaster Mage, but I think that's too basic. That's too simple. I want to see what people do with Pioneer with Past in Flames, because I think it's easy to forget that Past in Flames comes from Innistrad. And so like whatever, because like we don't have as many of the storm things that are out there, but cultivating some kind of combo deck that uses Past in Flames, I think would be a really interesting thing to work with. And you, at least without, I mean, you have Goblin Electromancer, but you don't have Grave Shot, you don't have Empty the Warrens. So it would be fascinating to see what kind of things people come up with Past in Flames, or even if they just have it be like a value thing. Like for instance, with like Reanimator was an archetype in Innistrad Return to Ravnica Standard, but it really wasn't Reanimator as we know it. Like, sure, you could reanimate an Angel of Serenity, and they ran like one or two of them, but it wasn't like Reanimator and Legacy where you're just going all in. Like, people were playing main deck scavenging ooze and everything, and so there wasn't much of a reason to really dive too deep into that. Burial Rites was just kind of a value train to work with your flicker engines of Thragtusk and Restoration Angel. So Past in Flames, I think, would be an interesting thing to build out that is both an enabler and kind of a build around, but not being inherently broken. Like, you gotta work for it to make something interesting.
I think the closest thing to there's like Thousand Year Storm, but there's Aetherflux Reservoir, I think, is like one of the other Storm win cons. But I agree, but yeah, I think that'd be really cool. I think also it's just like such an open-ended thing you can do that it offers something really powerful that as an incentive. But what are the payoffs? I think I'm gonna be lazy, and I'm gonna pick Lingering Souls. I don't know how lazy that is.
That's fine.
I think like Snapcaster Mage is not totally gone in Modern. I think that the moment that I think it's a little bit like the moment they print a good thing for it, the flashback is the moment it becomes good again, and in the moment it's decent. I think that like Lingering Souls has a very long road for it to ever come back in Modern, but Lingering Souls and Pioneer is a totally fair card. It lets you do really cool things. Maybe it's like a little too good in the Grease Fang decks, but even then, I don't even know if they'd play it. And it's just the most fun. It's like one of the most fun cards I've ever cast in my life.
Yeah, I mean, that is such an interesting kind of compelling design, because like it kind of leads you to what you want to do. Like, okay, well, I can pay 3 and then I can pay 2 for this, pay 5 for 4 spirits, or I can pitch this into the graveyard and then cast it back, flash it back for 2. Like, it does kind of lead you to the water, so to speak, very easily without it being so obvious. And so yeah, like it hits that note for flashback cards where it's like it's not like super good, like you would just play it wherever, but it entices you. It's like a little carrot to kind of reach for, to the idea of like, oh, let me flash it back and make 2 flyers kind of stuff. I can see that being fun.
There's around. Like enough. It's versatile enough that there's like a bunch of different ways you can take advantage of it. It does enough of an incentive to like, oh, I do want to discard this to Liliana the Veil. I don't always want to. Sometimes I just want to spend this for 3 mana and then cast it for 2 mana. But if I have Liliana or I have other ways to take advantage of it, the threats it create are never going to be world dominating, but they're going to be great for stabilization. And it might not even be good. Like in a world where Parhelion and Arclight Phoenix are what you're combating against, maybe it's just not good enough. But I think that there's a lot of cool things you can do with it and incentivize gameplay styles from self-mill to discard Jund-like style decks, but also just like token strategies. Going wide, spirit-based strategies become more available. And bringing it full circle back to spirits.
Yeah, and then you can get the RK post tokens that are Yusuke Urameshi spirit tokens, which is what I use for Lingering Souls in my Canadian Highlander deck.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. I need to see those tokens at some point.
Oh yeah, I'll send you a photo. They're wonderful.
All right. So thank you so much for joining the cast this week. It's been great to finally get you on. Is there where can people where last chance to send them somewhere? Where are they finding you?
Yeah, so you can find me on hipstersofthecoast.com. I have a column that comes out every other week on Wednesdays. It's called Far Wanderings. But I will make the plug for all other wonderful, talented writers on the site. And then personally, you can find me on Instagram at Travis_Norman. Although I will give a disclaimer, I don't talk about magic on that. It's more of just like outdoorsy kind of stuff. So if you're looking for magic content, you may be disappointed.
I feel like we talked at the beginning during the Patreon, which everyone should check out our Patreon, a bunch of cool stuff there about how it's good to have hobbies outside of just magic. And if you want to learn about outdoorsy bikey stuff, it's a great follow. And make sure to, check out all of our sponsors, Channel Fireball, Alter Sleeves, and make sure, if you're looking on TikTok and you're not following me, get on it at Kess Wiley. And we will talk to all of you next week. Thank you so much, Travis, for joining us. And thank you everyone for listening.